The clock in the empty hallway clicked over to 10:27 p.m. In the music room, the only light came from a small desk lamp, throwing a tired yellow circle over a sprawl of sheet music and student essays. The woman at the desk, the music teacher, rubbed her eyes. They felt gritty, like they were full of sand. The day had been long, filled with the squeaks of beginner clarinets and the gentle chaos of her after-school choir. But the night was for this, the endless battle of grades, lesson plans, and budgets. A sigh escaped her lips, more weary than angry. The paper in her hand was a funding request form. Again, the district was tightening belts, and the arts were always the first to feel the squeeze. She'd already fought to keep the middle school strings program alive. Now they were talking about instrument repairs, saying some of the older violins weren't cost-effective to fix. The words felt cold and wrong. A violin wasn't a piece of office equipment. It was a voice just as she tried to focus on the numbers. A sound drifted through the wall from the school's main auditorium next door. It was piano music. Or, well, it was the ghost of piano music, asterisk plink, plink, plink dash plonk dot asterisk. It was hesitant, broken, a simple scale. But it stumbled on the fourth note, backtracked, tried again. Then it stopped. A moment of silence, then the same clumsy pattern, a little slower this time. The teacher's head drooped. Not tonight. Please, not tonight. This had been happening for a week. Every evening she stayed late to catch up. This same halting, lonely practice would begin right around 10:30. It was like a sad, persistent alarm clock. She tried to ignore it, marking a red circle around a misspelled fortissimo on a freshman's paper. But the playing continued. It wasn't loud or aggressive. It was just there, a quiet, awkward intrusion into her already crowded thoughts. It was the sound of someone who had no business being near a fine instrument, treating the school's beautiful concert Steinway like a child's toy. Gritting her teeth, she pushed her chair back. The legs screeched on the linoleum floor. She marched out of the music room and into the dim, cavernous space of the auditorium. The emergency exit signs cast a faint red glow over the empty seats, making the place feel like a sleeping beast. There, on the wide stage under a single work light, was the janitor. She was the new evening cleaner, a quiet woman who always seemed to be finishing up as the teacher was settling in. The teacher knew her by sight, had given her a polite nod in the halls, but didn't even know her name. The woman was softly running a white cloth over the gleaming black lid of the grand piano. Her back was to the door. Asterisk plink, plonk, plink, asterisk. The janitor's left hand reached out and pressed a single bass key, then a higher one. Her head tilted as if listening for something deep inside the piano's belly. Excuse me. The teacher's voice cut through the quiet, sharper than she intended. The janitor's shoulders jumped a little. She turned around. She was older, maybe in her late 50s, with a kind, lined face and hair pulled back in a simple, practical bun. Her eyes, a soft brown, widened slightly behind her glasses. I'm so sorry to interrupt, the teacher said, walking down the aisle, trying to soften her tone. She reached the edge of the stage and looked up. It's just, I'm trying to get some very important work done next door. Budget reports. And the sound it carries. The janitor just looked at her, the cloth frozen in her hand. She didn't speak. It's this time of night, you know. I need it to be quiet to concentrate. The teacher forced a smile, the kind you give to a student who's drumming their fingers during a test. So, would you mind terribly not playing while you clean? I'm sure you understand. For a long second, the janitor just stood there. Her expression was unreadable, a calm mask. Then, she gave a single, slow nod. Not a nod of agreement, the teacher thought, but a nod of receipt, like she'd been given an order. Without a word, the janitor folded her cloth neatly, tucked it into the large metal cart parked in the wing of the stage, and gripped the cart's handle. She gave the piano one last, long look, not at the keys, but at the strings visible inside the propped open lid. It was a look the teacher didn't understand, a look of quiet farewell. The janitor then wheeled her cart toward the side door, the wheels squeaking softly on the polished stage floor. She pushed through the door, and it swung shut behind her with a solid asterisk thump asterisk. Silence flooded back into the auditorium, deeper and heavier than before. The teacher let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. Good. Problem solved. She felt a tiny prick of guilt, but she shoved it away. She had real problems. The future of her program was at stake. She couldn't be worrying about a janitor's clumsy attempts at chopsticks. As she turned to leave, her eye caught a movement by the side door's small window. The janitor was still there, just for a second, looking back into the auditorium, not at the teacher, but at the piano, and then the teacher saw it. The woman's right hand, hanging by her side, was moving. Her fingers were curling and stretching, slowly, deliberately, as if they were aching. They danced in the air for a brief moment of fluid, graceful motion that was nothing like the clumsy asterisk plinks asterisk and asterisk plonks asterisk from before. It looked like she was tracing the shape of a melody on an invisible keyboard. Then, she was gone. The teacher blinked. That was strange. Maybe her tired eyes were playing tricks. She shook her head, walking back to her lonely desk lamp and the waiting budget forms. The silence was complete now. She had gotten the quiet she wanted, but as she stared at the columns of numbers, they seemed to blur together. All she could hear in her head was not the clumsy scales, but that deep, final asterisk thump asterisk of the door closing, and all she could see was the unexpected, elegant dance of those fingers in the dim red light, a secret language she hadn't been meant to see. The quiet didn't last. It became a new kind of routine, a weekly tension that settled into the late hours of the school. Every Tuesday and Thursday, the music teacher stayed late. She told herself it was for the paperwork, the grading, the endless planning, and partly, that was true, but another part, a part she wouldn't even admit to herself, was listening, waiting for the sound from next door. And like clockwork, at 10:30 p.m. sharp, it would come. It was never a song. It was always fragments, broken pieces of sound. One night it might be the same stumbling major scale, going up and then crumbling on the way down. Another night it was the first 5 notes of Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, played with a heavy, uncertain touch, then abandoned. Sometimes it was just intervals of perfect fifth, then a minor third struck again and again, like someone testing the tuning of each string. The teacher found it incredibly annoying. It was the musical equivalent of a dripping tap. Each asterisk plink asterisk felt like a tiny poke, breaking her concentration. She'd be in the middle of writing a comment on a student's composition, and the halting, simple melody would worm its way into her thoughts, making her lose her train of idea completely. She started to see the janitor more during the day. The woman was a ghost in the halls, a silent presence. She moved with a slow, efficient grace, emptying bins, wiping down whiteboards with long, smooth strokes. She always wore simple, comfortable clothes and kept to herself. When students rushed past, she'd press herself against the lockers to give them space, offering a small, closed-lipped smile if one of them said hello. She never spoke. The teacher had never heard her voice. One afternoon, after a particularly frustrating staff meeting about resource reallocation, which was just a fancy term for more cuts, the teacher was in the staff room pouring a bitter cup of coffee. The art teacher, a man with paint often smudged on his elbows, came in looking just as defeated. "They're coming for my kiln next. I can feel it," he muttered, grabbing a mug. The music teacher sighed, stirring her coffee. "Try keeping a choir excited when you're telling them the sheet music budget has been halved. It's demoralizing." Just then, from far down the hall, came the faint, familiar sound, a clumsy scale, ascending, then falling apart. It was faint, but unmistakable. The art teacher didn't seem to notice, but the music teacher's head snapped up. "You hear that?" she said, her irritation bubbling over. The art teacher listened. "What, the piano?" "Yeah, sometimes. It's the cleaner, isn't it?" "Funny, she seems so quiet." "It's not funny, it's infuriating," the music teacher said, her voice tight. "Every time I'm trying to work late, there she is, just asterisk noodling asterisk. It's like she's haunting the place. And the worst part is, she doesn't even know how to play. It's just this sad, repetitive fumbling. It drives me up the wall." The art teacher shrugged. "Maybe she's learning. Everyone starts somewhere, on a concert Steinway, with no respect for the instrument." The teacher shook her head, dumping her untouched coffee down the sink. "It's like giving a Stradivarius to a toddler. It just feels wrong." The confrontation in the auditorium repeated itself, but it became colder, more formal. The teacher would hear the playing, her jaw would tighten, and she'd march next door. She'd find the janitor, not always playing, but often just standing by the piano, her hand resting lightly on the wood, or running a soft cloth in slow circles on the lid. "I'm sorry," the teacher would say from the aisle, not bothering to walk all the way to the stage, "but I really need the quiet. Remember?" The janitor would always stop immediately. She would give that same solemn nod, a nod that felt less like an apology and more like a soldier acknowledging a command from a general. She would pack her cloth away, her movements careful and deliberate, and wheel her cart out. She never made a sound of protest, never spoke a word. Her silence began to feel like a wall. The teacher started to notice small things about the cart. It was always impeccably organized. Spray bottles were lined up by height. Rags were folded into perfect squares. The mop head was always clean. It was the cart of someone who took pride in order, in doing a job right. This made the clumsy piano playing seem even more baffling. How could someone so precise with everything else be so careless with music? Then came the bad day. It was a Thursday. The email arrived just as the final bell rang. The district was canceling the advanced music theory class due to low enrollment. Only 6 students had signed up. 6 passionate, brilliant kids who lived for composition and analysis. Their hearts would be broken. The teacher felt a crushing weight of failure on her chest. She had fought for that class, championed it, and she had lost. She stayed late that night because she couldn't face going home. The empty classroom matched the hollow feeling inside her. She sat at her desk, not even pretending to work, just staring at the wall. The future felt bleak and silent. And then, right on schedule, 10:30 p.m. asterisk plink, plink plonk, plink, asterisk. It was the scale again. That same, stupid, stumbling scale. It was the only sound in the vast, empty school. To the teacher, raw from her defeat, it wasn't just an annoyance anymore. It felt like a mockery, a symbol of everything that was wrong: the lack of respect, the clumsy handling of beautiful things, the constant, grating noise in the face of her silent disaster. Anger, hot and sharp, rose up in her throat. She stormed out of the room, her footsteps echoing like slaps in the hallway. She threw open the auditorium doors. The janitor was at the piano bench this time. She wasn't cleaning. She was just sitting there, her back straight, looking at the keys. Her right hand was hovering over them, her fingers curved gently, as if about to begin something. But she wasn't playing. That's asterisk at asterisk. The teacher's voice exploded in the quiet space, louder than she'd ever used with a student. She marched down to the stage and stared up. What is wrong with you? Do you not listen? I have asked you, again and again and again. This is not a toy. This is a $15,000 instrument. The janitor flinched as if she'd been struck. She slowly turned her head. In the dim light, her eyes weren't just wide with surprise this time. There was a flash of something else, a deep, wounded shock. It was the look of someone who had been unexpectedly slapped. The teacher saw it, and for a second, her anger wavered. But the frustration was too much. Just clean asterisk around asterisk it. Do your job and leave it alone. Is that so hard to understand? For a long, terrible moment, they just looked at each other. The air in the auditorium felt thick and cold. The janitor's face smoothed back into its usual calm mask, but her eyes had gone distant. Then, without a word, she stood up. She didn't nod this time. She simply closed the piano lid with a gentle, final asterisk thud asterisk. She walked to her cart, placed her cloth inside with slow, deliberate care, and pushed it toward the door. But before she left, she stopped. She turned back, not to the teacher, but to the piano, and she did something she had never done before. She gave a small, formal bow from the waist. It was a tiny gesture, graceful and old-fashioned. It was a farewell, not to the teacher, to the piano. Then she was gone. The door swung shut. This time, the silence she left behind was absolute. It was a heavy, smothering silence that filled the teacher's ears and pressed down on her shoulders. The angry words she had shouted seemed to hang in the air, ugly and sharp. She suddenly felt very small, standing alone in the dark auditorium. The hollow feeling from earlier returned, deeper now, mixed with a new, sickening pinch of shame. She had won. She had finally gotten the quiet she wanted. But as she walked back to her empty, dark classroom to gather her things, the victory felt like ashes in her mouth. The only sound was the lonely click of her own heels on the floor, and a new, uncomfortable echo in her own mind. The silence in the late hours became permanent. For 2 whole weeks, the teacher worked in a quiet so complete she could hear the hum of the clock on the wall, and the distant groan of the school's heating pipes. She told herself it was better. She could think. She could finally get ahead of the paperwork. But the quiet felt strange. It felt like something was missing. Sometimes, in the middle of writing an email, she would pause, her pen hovering over the page, waiting for a sound that never came. The absence of those clumsy scales was somehow louder than they had ever been. She would catch herself looking toward the auditorium door, half expecting it to open. It never did. The shame from that last night set in her stomach like a cold stone. She had seen the look in the janitor's eyes. She had replayed that small, formal bow in her mind 100 times. It wasn't the gesture of a scolded employee. It was the gesture of an artist closing a performance. She tried to shake the feeling off. It was just her imagination, running wild with stress. Then, a flicker of hope. The principal called her into his office. A representative from the State Board of Education was doing a tour of district schools. This wasn't just any official. This was a man known for being a fierce advocate for the arts. He was looking for programs to highlight, to use as examples of excellence worth funding. "This is it," the principal said, his glasses perched on the end of his nose. "This is your chance. Show him what we do here. Make it sing." If he's impressed, it could mean real support, new instruments, maybe even saving your theory class. A wild, desperate energy took hold of the teacher. This was the lifeline she'd been praying for. She threw herself into planning the perfect showcase. It would be during the official's visit, right in the auditorium. She would have the concert band play a movement from a classic piece. The choir would perform a complex, beautiful spiritual. And for the grand finale, the piece de resistance, her star student would play a solo. He was a senior, a boy with long, graceful fingers and a serious, quiet demeanor. He had won competitions. The piece was Rachmaninoff demanding, emotional prelude that ranged from whispering tenderness to thunderous, rolling chords. It was exactly the kind of thing to show depth, skill, and passion. It was perfect to the days were a blur of frantic rehearsals. The band polished their sections, the choir worked on their dynamics, and the pianist practiced relentlessly. The teacher could hear him in the afternoons, the powerful notes flowing from the practice room, a sound so different from the halting scales of before. This was mastery. This was what she wanted the official to see. The morning of the visit arrived. The school was buzzing with a nervous, polished energy. Hallways were extra clean. Student artwork was prominently displayed. The teacher was in her best suit, herding her students through a final run-through. Everything had to be flawless. 30 minutes before the showcase was to begin, she was in the music room, tuning a viola for a nervous freshman, when her phone buzzed. It was a text from her star pianist. Her heart, which had been fluttering with nervous excitement, froze solid. The message was a wall of frantic text. * family emergency. My grandmother, ambulance, at the hospital. I am so sorry. I can't make it. I'm so sorry. *. The room seemed to tilt. The sounds of students warming up, the chatter, the squeak of a reed, all melted into a meaningless roar. She stared at the screen, her fingers gone cold. No, this couldn't be happening. Not today. Not now. Everyone, quiet, she shouted, and the room fell silent. Her face must have looked terrifying, because all the students stared at her, wide-eyed. Does anyone know the Rachmaninoff prelude in C-sharp minor? The one we planned for the finale? A sea of blank, frightened faces looked back. A couple of the advanced piano students shook their heads slowly. One said, "I've heard it, ma'am, but I could never. Not without months of practice." Panic, cold and slick, wrapped around her lungs. This was it. The grand finale of her showcase, the moment meant to seal the deal, was gone. The official would see a good band, a fine choir, and then, nothing. An awkward gap, an apology. It would look unprofessional, unprepared. The story wouldn't be about the excellence of the program. It would be about its last-minute failure, the funding, the theory class. It would all evaporate. She told the students to keep warming up, her voice thin and tight. She walked out of the music room, her legs feeling like wood. She paced the empty hallway, her mind racing in frantic, useless circles. She could change the program, cut the solo, end with the choir. But it would be weak. It would be a confession of limitation. The polished floors gleamed under the harsh fluorescent lights. The clock ticked relentlessly toward the start time. She felt the eyes of the principal, of the visiting official, of all her students, on her back. The weight of it was crushing her. And then, she saw the janitor. The woman was at the far end of the hall, near the auditorium's double doors. She was polishing the brass door handles with a focused calm, methodical and untouched by the panic swirling around her. She moved her cloth in slow, circular motions, making the old brass shine. The teacher stared at her. A memory flashed, not of the clumsy scales, but of the fingers. Those fingers, dancing in the air by the door, tracing a secret, graceful melody. It had been a trick of the light, surely. A strange habit. The woman cleaned pianos. She didn't play them. She fumbled. She annoyed. But the memory wouldn't leave. It joined another, the formal bow, the silent, wounded shock, the way she hadn't just cleaned the piano, but had looked at it, like it was an old friend. A wild, insane thought planted itself in the teacher's desperate mind. It was a stupid thought, a humiliating, ridiculous, last-ditch thought. Her feet started moving before her brain could stop them. She walked down the hall, her heels clicking a frantic rhythm on the tile. The janitor heard her coming and looked up. Her expression was careful, neutral, like a sheet of smooth paper. She stopped polishing and waited, the cloth held loosely in her hand. The teacher stopped in front of her. Up close, she could see the fine lines around the woman's eyes, the quiet patience in her gaze. The words stuck in her throat. This was madness. She was about to ask the school cleaner to perform a Rachmaninoff masterpiece. For the State Board of Education, she opened her mouth. Nothing came out but a shaky breath. The janitor just watched her, waiting. The teacher began, her voice a dry croak. She cleared her throat. There's a problem with the showcase. Right now, the janitor's head tilted slightly. A silent question. My pianist. He can't come. There's a family emergency. The words tumbled out now, rushed and desperate. It's the final piece. It's very important. It's all planned. She gestured weakly toward the auditorium doors. The janitor's eyes flicked toward them, then back to the teacher's face. There was no understanding there, just that same, infuriating, calm silence. The teacher's desperation broke through her embarrassment. She took a step closer. Her voice dropped to a frantic whisper. You're always at that piano, every night. I heard you, I saw. She stammered, waving a hand vaguely. Your hands. That last time. She was making no sense. She knew it. The janitor's expression didn't change. Finally, the teacher just blurted it out. The crazy question. The one that had nothing to stand on but a feeling and a memory of dancing fingers. Do you actually play ? For a long, endless moment, the janitor didn't move. She didn't nod. She didn't shake her head. She just looked at the teacher, and for the first time, the teacher felt like she was truly being seen. The calm mask seemed to soften at the edges. Something flickered in the depths of her brown eyes, a recognition. A long-buried spark waking up from a deep sleep. Slowly, very slowly, the janitor's gaze shifted from the teacher's pleading face to the auditorium doors, to where the piano sat waiting. The silence between them stretched, filled with the distant sound of the band tuning up and the teacher's own pounding heart. Then, the janitor looked back at her, and she gave a simple nod. It wasn't the old, obedient nod of receipt. It was different. It was an answer. The single nod hung in the air between them. It wasn't a promise. It wasn't an agreement. It was just a fact. Yes, I play. The teacher felt a dizzying rush of hope, so sharp it was almost painful. But it was followed instantly by a wave of cold, practical terror. What had she done? She had just asked the janitor, the woman she had shushed and scolded for weeks, to perform in front of the most important audience of her career. She didn't even know what the woman could play. Twinkle, twinkle with 2 fingers, the clumsy scales that had driven her mad. There was no time to ask. There was no time for anything. The principal was walking down the hall toward them, the visiting official beside him. The official was a tall man with a kind, observant face, already smiling politely in their direction. Showtime in 5, the principal said, his voice tight with his own nerves. He glanced at the janitor, then back at the teacher, a question in his eyes. The teacher just gave a frantic, wobbly smile and nodded. She turned back to the janitor. Please, she whispered, the word full of every fear and hope she had. The piano. It's ready. The janitor looked at her for one more second. Then, she did something utterly unexpected. She carefully folded her polishing cloth into a perfect small square, and placed it on the seat of her cleaning cart. It was a deliberate, calm action, like a musician setting down their case before a performance. She smoothed the front of her simple, clean work shirt, and then she walked, not with her usual quiet shuffle, but with a new, straight-backed grace, toward the auditorium doors. She pushed one open and slipped inside, letting it swing shut behind her. The teacher stood frozen, her heart hammering against her ribs. She had to go in. She had to introduce the program. She had to somehow explain this. The auditorium was full. The concert band occupied the first few rows of the stage, instruments glinting under the lights. The choir stood on the bleachers behind them. In the center of the audience sat the official, the principal, and a handful of teachers and parents. The air buzzed with anticipation. The teacher walked to the small podium at the front of the stage, her notes trembling in her hands. The first two parts of the showcase went by in a blur. The band played well. The choir sounded beautiful. She heard the music, but it was like listening from underwater. Her entire being was focused on the grand piano sitting alone at the center of the stage, a dark, silent beast. The janitor was nowhere to be seen. Had she left? Had she changed her mind? After the choir's final note faded into warm applause, the teacher stepped back to the podium. This was it. She clutched the sides of the wooden stand, her knuckles white. Our final piece today, she began, her voice sounding too high and thin in the microphone, was to be a piano solo by one of our most talented seniors. A family emergency has taken him from us today, and we send our thoughts to him and his family. She paused, swallowing hard. The audience murmured sympathetically. However, music has a way of finding its voice in unexpected places. We have a member of our school community who has graciously agreed to step in. She had no name to give, no title that made sense. Her mind blanked. She simply gestured toward the stage wing. Please welcome. From the shadows of the wing, the janitor walked out. A soft, confused ripple went through the audience. They saw a woman in plain, clean work clothes, her hair in its practical bun. She didn't look like a performer. She looked like someone who had come to fix a light. The teacher saw the principal sit up very straight, his eyes wide. The visiting official simply watched, his head tilted, curious. The janitor didn't look at the audience. She didn't look at the teacher. Her eyes were fixed on the piano. She walked to it as if pulled by a magnet. She stopped beside the bench. For a long moment, she just stood there, her hand resting lightly on the polished wood of the piano's curve. It was the same way she touched it when she cleaned it. A familiar, gentle touch. Then she sat, not like someone settling into a chair, but like a bird landing on its branch. She adjusted the bench with two small, precise movements, forward and then a tilt. She straightened her back. She lifted her hands and let them rest, poised just above the keys. Her work-worn hands, with their short, neat nails. The teacher held her breath. The entire auditorium was silent, waiting for the first clumsy note. It did not come. Instead, the janitor closed her eyes. She took a slow, deep breath that seemed to fill her entire body. And when she exhaled, her shoulders dropped, and a profound stillness settled over her. In that instant, the woman who emptied trash bins and mopped floors vanished. Someone else was sitting there. Her hands descended. The sound that came from the piano was not a note. It was a whisper, a deep, resonant, low whisper that seemed to bloom from the very heart of the instrument. It was followed by a single, pure, high note that hung in the air like a tear. Then another, and another, weaving together into a melody that was unspeakably sad and beautiful. It wasn't the Rachmaninoff. It was something else. Something older, more intricate, full of rolling waves of bass notes and a right hand that danced with impossible lightness. Chopin. It was Chopin's Ballade No. 1. The teacher knew it instantly. It was a mountain of a piece, a torrent of emotion that ranged from lyrical mourning to violent, passionate storms. It was not something you learned. It was something you lived, you fought with, you poured your soul into for years. And the janitor was not just playing it. She was telling a story with it. Her body moved with the music, not with big, dramatic sweeps, but with a deep, inward concentration. Her shoulders swayed slightly. Her head nodded with the phrases. Her face, usually so expressionless, was alive not with smiling, but with feeling. A slight wince at a discordant passage, a softening at a sweet resolution. Her fingers, those same fingers that had clumsily pressed single keys, now flew across the keyboard in blurs of motion. They leaped and crossed, pounding out thunderous chords that shook the floorboards, then retreated to caress a fragile, heartbreaking melody so softly the audience had to lean forward to hear it. The teacher forgot to breathe. She stood frozen at the podium, watching a miracle unfold 6 feet in front of her. This was not a hidden talent. This was a buried life. Every note, every phrase, was flawless. It was more than technique. It was memory, pain, love, and loss, all translated into sound. The clumsy scales she had heard for weeks. They hadn't been practice. They had been a ritual. A person whispering hello to an old friend, checking its pulse, making sure it was still alive. The music swelled to its famous, frantic, nearly impossible coda. The janitor's hands became a storm, racing up and down the keys in a wild, passionate rush. The sound was huge, filling every corner of the auditorium, vibrating in the chests of everyone listening. It was furious, it was glorious, it was a final, defiant cry, And then, with two crashing, definitive chords, it was over. The silence that followed was absolute. It was a different silence than before. It was a stunned, reverent, full silence. No one clapped. No one moved. The janitor's hands fell from the keys and rested in her lap. She bowed her head, her shoulders rising and falling with deep, slow breaths. The spell was broken, but the audience was still caught in it. The teacher was the first to move. A single, hot tear rolled down her cheek, then another. She wasn't crying for the show, or for the funding. She was crying for the profound, awful beauty of what she had just witnessed. She was crying for the woman at the piano, and for every wrong assumption she had ever made. Slowly, as if waking from a dream, the audience began to applaud. It started with the visiting official, who rose to his feet, his face full of awe. Then the principal stood. Then every student, every teacher, every parent was on their feet. The sound was not polite applause. It was a roaring, thunderous wave of gratitude and shock. The janitor looked up, startled, as if she'd forgotten anyone else was there. She saw the standing ovation. For a second, she looked almost afraid. Then, she did what performers do. She stood, turned to the audience, and gave a small, humble bow. Not the formal, farewell bow she had given the piano in the dark. This was a living, grateful acknowledgement. As the applause continued, she walked off the stage, not back to the wing, but down the steps and up the aisle toward the doors. She didn't look at the teacher as she passed. She just walked, her head down, slipping back into the shadows from which she'd come. The teacher finally found her voice. She turned to the microphone, her face wet. "Thank you," she whispered, but her voice was lost in the roar. She didn't need to say anything else. The music had said it all. The official was making his way toward her, his hand outstretched, his eyes shining, but the teacher barely saw him. She was looking at the empty piano bench, and then at the door where the janitor had disappeared. One question screamed in her mind, louder than any applause. "Who are you?" The roar in the auditorium slowly softened to a buzzing hum, but it didn't stop. People were talking, shaking their heads in wonder, their faces lit up. The teacher stood by the podium, feeling like she was made of glass. The official reached her, clasping her hand with both of his. "That," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "was not just a performance. That was a gift. To this school. To everyone here. Please, tell me about your artist-in-residence program. I had no idea you had such a profound musical resource right here." The words washed over her. *artist-and-residence. The term felt so absurd, so painfully off-target, that it finally snapped her back to the moment. She managed a weak smile, mumbled something about community, and promised to talk later. Her eyes were scanning the emptying room, looking for a flash of a work shirt. A quiet figure slipping away. She found the janitor in the band room 20 minutes later. The showcase was over. The students had chattered their way onto buses, and the visiting party was in the principal's office. The school was settling into its after-school quiet. The janitor was not cleaning. She was sitting on a folding chair in the corner, her hands folded neatly in her lap, staring at the floor. She looked smaller somehow, the powerful presence from the stage completely gone. She just looked tired. The teacher stood in the doorway for a moment, watching her. All the words she had practiced, the thank you, the praise, the questions flew out of her head. What was left was something simpler and heavier. She walked in and sat in a chair opposite her, the metal legs scraping loudly in the quiet room. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The only sound was the hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. The teacher looked at the woman's hands, now resting so still. The same hands that had just commanded a symphony from a piano. Finally, the teacher spoke, her voice quiet and rough. "I owe you an apology. A very, very big one." The janitor looked up. Her eyes were the same soft brown, but they held a deep, old sadness now, no longer hidden behind a mask. "The things I said to you, I didn't understand. I thought you were." The teacher faltered, shame heating her face. "I thought you were just making noise. I was stressed and worried about losing everything, and I took it out on you. I was cruel, and I am so sorry." The janitor considered this. She didn't nod or shrug. She just listened. Then she looked down at her own hands, turning them over as if seeing them for the first time. "You asked me who I am," the janitor said. Her voice was low, melodic, and slightly husky from disuse. It was a beautiful voice. "I am a person who played the piano. A long, long time ago." The story came out in pieces, in quiet sentences between long pauses. She had been a child prodigy, winning small competitions, destined for a conservatory, maybe a stage. But life, as it does, had other plans. Her mother became very sick when she was just out of high school. There were no other family members. There was no money for schools far away. There was only a bed to tend to, meals to cook, pills to administer, and long, quiet hours in a small apartment. The piano. It became a memory, the janitor said, her gaze distant. It was too loud for her headaches. Then, when she was gone, it was too loud for the empty rooms. It spoke of a life I couldn't have anymore. It hurt to listen, so she put it away. She found jobs that were quiet, that demanded her hands for practical things. Cleaning was one of them. It was orderly. You could see the result of your work. A clean floor, a shining surface. It was nothing like music, which vanished into the air the moment you made it. She took the evening job at the school because it was peaceful, and because of the piano. I saw it on my first night, she said, almost to herself. That beautiful, big Steinway, sitting in the dark. It looked lonely, like it was waiting. So I started to care for it, really care for it. Not just wiping the dust, but listening to it. The scales you heard, they weren't me playing. They were me asking the piano how it was feeling, checking if a key was sticking, if a string was going dull. It was our conversation. The teacher felt a lump in her throat so large she couldn't swallow. She thought of her own sharp words, asterisk, this isn't a toy, asterisk. This woman had loved the instrument more deeply in those silent checkups than the teacher ever had. In all her years of assigning sonatas. Why didn't you ever say anything? The teacher whispered. When I kept telling you to stop? The janitor gave a small, sad smile. You were the music teacher. This was your world. I was just the cleaner. And I was afraid. If I played, even a little, it might all come back. The want, the loss. It was easier to just listen to it, to keep it company in the dark. Until I begged you to, the teacher said, the full weight of her own desperate request settling on her. The janitor met her eyes. Yes, until you begged me to. They sat in the quiet again, but it was a different quiet now, not empty, but full of understanding. The story of the mystery janitor spread like wildfire. The local paper did a feature. A news crew came to the school. The principal, once shocked, was now beaming with a kind of bewildered pride. The visiting official was true to his word. Not only was the advanced theory class saved, but a new grant was fast-tracked for the music department, specifically earmarked for mentorship and legacy programs. The teacher went to the principal with a proposal. It was simple. The janitor's job description would change. She would become the school's first instrument curator and artist mentor. She would be responsible for the care of all the musical instruments, a job she was already doing in secret, and she would offer private coaching to the most advanced piano students. The principal agreed immediately. After that performance, she could teach us all a thing or two about dedication, he said. The teacher found the janitor the next day, cleaning the practice room windows. She laid out the offer, careful, not wanting to pressure. It would be your choice, completely. You could just tune the pianos if you wanted, or you could do nothing at all. The job is yours either way. The janitor stood with her spray bottle in hand, looking out at the empty football field. She was silent for so long the teacher thought she might refuse. Then she said, the boy who was sick, your star student. Is he all right? He is. His grandmother is recovering. Good, the janitor said softly. He has a gentle touch, but he rushes the middle section of the Rachmaninoff off. The emotion gets ahead of his fingers. A week later, a new routine began. In the afternoons, the janitor, now the curator, would sit in the practice room with a senior pianist. She didn't talk much about theory. She talked about feeling. This part, she would say, playing a phrase with a heartbreaking clarity. This is not a storm. This is the memory of a storm. Play it like you're remembering it, not like you're in it. The students listened to her with a reverence they usually reserved for rock stars. One Thursday evening, the teacher was working late again. Old habits. But the work felt lighter now. The fear was gone. As she packed her bag, she heard it, not clumsy scales, not a thunderous ballade. It was a duet. The rich, complex sound of four hands on one piano, weaving together two melodies into one harmonious conversation. She walked to the auditorium and pushed the door open just a crack. On the stage, under a single spotlight, two figures sat side by side on the piano bench. One was her star senior, his face focused. The other was the curator, her hands moving in time with his. They were working through a difficult passage, stopping, laughing softly at a mistake, trying again. The teacher saw the student ask a question, and the curator's hands moved to demonstrate, her fingers flowing over the keys in a liquid movement. The student watched, then tried it himself, closer this time. The teacher didn't go in. She didn't want to break the spell. She simply stood in the shadow of the doorway, watching the two of them, the teacher she had been, and the teacher she now was, both learning from the quiet woman who had found her voice again. The music they made was imperfect, full of stops and starts, but it was alive. It was no longer a ghost in the hall or a weapon for a showcase. It was a living, breathing thing, passed from one pair of hands to another, keeping the lonely silence of the old school at bay, one note at a time.